Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Trifacta Basics webinar. The goal of this webinar is to teach a lot of the fundamentals of Trifacta and bring you along a end-to-end walkthrough of the product with the hopes of getting you familiar with a lot of the concepts within Trifacta and capable of using the product on your own following this session. So the first thing that I want to do is show you what we'll be accomplishing by the end of this webinar. Here you can see what we call a flow. You can see all of the source data that we're working with here on the left. We have two recipes, which I'll go into a little bit more in detail in a bit, and also the output that we're creating, which we will then use in some downstream analytics process, whether it's creating a dashboard or a visualization or using the data for some machine learning or data science model. So this is what we're going to be creating. So the first thing that we want to do to get us on our journey is create a new flow. So you can think of this flow as a project that contains all of the data sets that we'll be using to create a specific output. I'm just going to go ahead and call this webinar 1-30, and my flow description, I could just call this walkthrough. Okay, and this should bring us into our flow view. Now we don't have any data sets yet, so what I need to do is import these data sets. So I'm going to go ahead and click import. You'll see this little helper is going to pop up on the left. I'm just going to dismiss that for now. On the left here, you can see that we also connect to databases. Now this is the free product. In our enterprise product, we have various connections to relational databases, file systems, data catalogs, and so on. But for the purpose of this webinar, we'll just be using some local flat files. So I'm going to choose the files, and this is going to bring me into a file browser. I'm just going to select this first file, shift-click onto all of the files that I want to bring in, and I will go ahead and open that. So you should see here on the right, these are all the files that I will be bringing into my flow. I can rename these, add a description, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and import these. And I'll quickly add them. And as this completes, you'll see that I now have all of these data sets on the left here, here in my flow. So we're going to be creating recipes on top of both this 2010 transactions file and this lab customers database file. Think of this like an extract from a database. So what we're going to be doing is creating some steps to clean up these transaction files. We're going to be unioning all 6 of the transaction files together. And once we do that, we're going to join that data with our lab customers database or file with the hopes of doing a quick aggregation to get some metrics on customer transaction history and what have you. So I am going to add a recipe here. I'm also going to add a recipe on this lab customers file. This will allow me to switch back and forth once I'm in the transformer grid a little bit easier. And so on that point, I'm going to edit this recipe, and this is going to bring me into the transformer grid. So this is really the core of our product. You can see here that the data is presented in a familiar tabular-like grid. We also have some additional profiling information. So you can see that we have a data type. We also have a data quality bar. Now this is going to be based on the data type. So for instance, let's take this product column. If I were to switch this to an integer, it's going to recognize all of these rows as mismatched values. The reason for this is we have an integer data type. All of these values are of a string type, so Trifacta does not recognize that as a valid integer. So I'll go ahead and switch that back. One thing to note as well, everything you see here you can interact with. So for instance, let's say I want to filter down to a set of months in this transaction date column. I can drag or highlight over those values, and Trifacta is going to bring up a suggestion here on the right. I can select any of these suggestions and I can edit them, add them to my recipe, and so on. Likewise, for the data quality bar, I can select, say, the missing values, and if I wanted to delete those missing values to filter down my view, I could go ahead and do that. But what we want to do here is actually convert this discount column into a decimal. The goal is then going to be to apply this discount to this ticket price, creating a new column that has the discounted ticket price. So the first thing I need to do is get rid of this little percentage sign. Trifacta doesn't recognize percentage as a valid data type, so in order to convert this discount, I need to get rid of this percentage sign, then I'm going to divide the values in this column by 100. To get rid of this sign, I can actually simply just highlight on that percentage sign. You'll see that I get a suggestion here to replace this little percentage sign with empty text, and we also get a preview of what that transformation is going to accomplish. So you can see here, this is the original column. This is a preview of what it will look like if we apply that suggestion, and that happens to look pretty good, so I will add that to my recipe. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to set all of these values to a formula that's going to be this discount column divided by 100. So to do that, I can create a manual step here. So I can do that either by selecting this new step button, or I can do a new step down here with this plus button. And I'm going to find a transformation that sets the value of a column to the result of a formula. So if I select this, Trifacta is going to bring up some parameters that I can enter values into. So for instance, the column that I want to apply the set transformation to is the discount column. And then the formula that I want to do is going to be take that discount column and divide it by 100. And again, we're getting a real-time preview of what this is going to accomplish. So you can see these 5 values are being set to 0.05, which appears to be what we want there. So I'm going to add that to my recipe. Now before we apply this discount to this ticket price column, I want to make sure that the resulting column that we get, the discounted ticket price, contains all of these values. And if I were to multiply ticket price by some formula including missing values, I'm not going to get any values there either, because Trifacta is not going to know what to interpret these missing values as. So what I can do is select this black bar in the discount column. This is going to bring up some suggestions here, and you'll see one of these suggestions is to set, so that's using the same transformation that we used before, missing values to 0. And you'll see here that now all of these missing values are being updated with a 0. If I wanted to take a look at what the underlying transformation looks like, I can do that. So we have set column discount, and then it's checking if this discount column is missing, and this $ call is just a wildcard for any columns that you've put up in this columns parameter. We're going to set those values to 0. So I'm going to add that to my recipe. Now you can see Trifacta has inferred that this is an integer column. We actually want this to be a decimal, since we see that we have some values that aren't integers here. So I can quickly just switch the data type there, and you'll see that the data quality bar has now updated. Okay, so to apply the discount to this ticket price, what we want to do is create a new column, and this new column is going to be the result of a formula. So again, we're going to find a transformation. This time we want one that creates a new column with the result of a formula. I will select that, and then the formula we want to do here is going to be ticket price. We want to multiply that by 1 minus the discount. You'll see that now for rows where there is a non-zero value in discount, we're getting a new value in this column 1. We're getting a preview of that. I can call this discounted ticket price. And again, I will add this to my recipe. Now, one last thing I want to do this data set before I do anything else is I happen to know that in years after 2010, Basic and Deluxe in this product column actually become silver and gold. So what I need to do is create a condition that takes Basic and converts it to silver, and takes Deluxe and converts it to gold. Now I can start this condition by simply clicking on this frequency bar in the product column. What I want to do is set it to a new value. Now this suggestion says to set to null, so I definitely want to edit that. And instead of the if function here, I'm actually going to use a case statement because I want to do multiple conditions. So what I'm going to do here is just set up the way I want this case statement to look. And the first case statement or condition is going to be if product equals basic. I want this to now say silver. And you're seeing as I do this an update in the preview as well. Second condition I want is if product equals deluxe. I want it to return gold. And lastly, I have my else condition here. And so if neither of these conditions are met, I want it to stay the same, which is product. Cool. So now you're seeing that whenever it's basic or deluxe, we're updating to the new values. Whenever it's platinum, platinum is staying the same, which is what we want. So we will add this to our recipe. Now this is a good time to talk a little bit more about what this recipe is exactly. So this recipe is essentially a set of steps or logical steps that we're applying to our data set. What we're seeing in the grid here is what the data will look like with all of these steps up until this blue dotted line applied to our data. So if I click on step 4, for instance, this is going to bring us back in time to when we've only applied these 4 steps to our data set. So as I sort of alluded to earlier, what we want to do is actually append all of these lab transaction files together and apply all of these steps to those 6 files. So in order to do that, I actually want my union step to be the very first step of my recipe. Now, what's nice about Trifacta is at any point in time, you can go back in your recipe and insert steps before or after steps that you've already created. So in this case, what I want to do is go to step 1. I'm going to click on this More Options button, and I'm actually going to insert a step before step 1. This step is going to be a union, and when I press enter there, this is going to bring me to my union interface. What I want to do is add all of those data sets, so I'll select that button, and I'm going to check all of the boxes for the transaction files that I want to include. Now we're not going to use lab 2010 since that's the file that we're currently working on. I'll add datasets and align by name. And what Trifacta is going to do is it's going to align all of the columns that match the names of this lab 2010 transactions file. I'll give that a moment to load. Now, if some of these column names were different, for instance, let's say in 2010, this ticket price column was spelled differently or had a different name entirely, what we can do is we can always manually match columns that we want in our union. So I could have just matched this ticket price right back into that union. We can also preview what the output of each of these union columns is going to look like. And once we validate that everything looks good, we can go ahead and add this to our recipe. So you should see now that this union is the first step of our recipe. All the other steps got bumped up one, And if I want all of these steps applied to this new data set, that is the 6 files union together, and you can tell because this transaction date column now goes from 2010 all the way to 2015. So if I want all these steps applied, I can simply click on the last step in my recipe, and you'll now see that all of this data that we've created, like this discounted ticket price, has been updated. And we have here silver, gold, and platinum. Cool. So hopefully everyone has followed along thus far. What we want to do now is switch over to our customer database file, and we want to join this transaction history to our customer database, and then we're going to do a few steps on our customer database before finishing up our work here. So if I switch on over to Lab Customers, the first thing I want to do here is the join. So before I do anything else, I'm going to add a new step, type in join, and I'll select that. And now we're going to be brought to our join interface. So the file that I want is going to be this lab 2010 transactions file, which is going to contain all of the union data sets in it. I'll preview that selected data set. This is just to make sure that it's the right data set you want to join with. And we can see this discounted ticket price, so all looks good there. And then we'll select our join keys. Now, if the join keys that are inferred by Trifacta are not the correct join keys, we can always go in here and edit that join condition. We can also add additional join keys if we had multiple columns that we want to join on. We can toggle between an inner join, a left outer join, a right outer join, and a full outer join. For the sake of time, I won't go into those, but if you're familiar with SQL, then they should be fairly familiar concepts to you. We also have some information on our website that details a little bit more about what those types of joins are. Now, it's important to note that the output by default is only the 2 columns in the join keys. So I'm going to select all over here on the left. This is going to highlight all of the columns that are in this column browser, and then I can manually deselect any columns that I don't want showing up in that output. So let's say maybe I don't really care about the region either. I can deselect that. Whenever I'm ready, I can go ahead and add this to my recipe. Okay. Now, before we do any sort of aggregations, I know that there's one more thing I want to clean up here. So I have this start date column, and within this start date column, I have some values that have this short month, and then this day, and then year. And what I want is to convert these incorrect date formats to this value right here. Now, one way that I can do this is if I force a data type, and I'm actually going to force it to the incorrect data type here, which is going to be the short month, day, year. Then I can use a date format function, and it's going to convert all of these dates to a date that I specify, or a date format that I specify. So if I click up here on this data type, I'm going to select date time. Then I'll select the month, day, year, and I'll get a drop down right here. And what I want is the short month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. I'll save that. And now you can see I have 10,000 plus mismatch values and 2,000 plus valid values. I'm actually going to use these valid values in my transform step. So I'll select those. I'll select this suggestion to set these values to null, and we're going to edit that because we don't want to actually set them to null. And this is where we'll use that date format function that I alluded to. So if I start typing date format, you'll see this function pop up. If I then click inside that, it's going to lead me through this. So the column that we're going to use is start date. the format that we want is going to be 4-digit year, then we want a slash, and then we want a 2-digit month, and then we'll do a slash, and a 2-digit day. Lastly, I need to close this final parenthesis. And actually, I need capital M's here, since lowercase m's is going to signify minutes. So now you can see that these values right here in the state column are being updated to their correct format. I will go ahead and add that. Now, if you're confused at all and if I'm moving a little bit too quickly, I'll open up some time at the end here to ask any questions, and I'll also give you my email in case you want to follow up with any questions, any specific questions. Okay, so now that we have all of this information, and let's say our data is clean and in line, let's say we want to do or find some information on some of the sales, what the total sales for, let's say, a year are, what the minimum sales are, what the maximum sales are, average sales, and so on. What we can do, before I do that actually, I want to pull out the year from this transaction date because we're going to use that year as a grouping mechanism in our aggregate. So to do that, I can click on this column dropdown. I'll go down to find, and within find you can see here we have year. So if I select that, it's going to pull up a template step over here on the right, and you'll see that what this is doing is it's taking the year from the transaction date and creating a new column from that. Looks to be what I want, so I'll go ahead and add that. Now I can do that aggregate step. So I'm going to primarily be using, I'll primarily be using this discount ticket price. And I might also want some information on the discount itself. So let's go ahead and create a new step. And this time I'm going to use an aggregate transform, which is going to group values and perform aggregate functions. So the first thing we need to do is specify our aggregate functions. So let's say one thing we want to learn is the sum of the discounted ticket price. Maybe another thing we want to learn is the average of the discount. Maybe we also want to know max of the discounted ticket price, min of the discounted ticket price. And as I do this, you're seeing all these columns populate down here in this preview. And lastly, let's do the average of the discounted ticket price. Now to get some more details, or in other words, to add rows here, what I need to do is group by the columns that I want to find that information for. So one thing I mentioned was the transaction year. So I want this year transaction date. And maybe I also want to, let's see, maybe I want the address state, for instance, just to get a little bit more granular detail here. I can select that also as a group by criteria. Now what you'll see here is we have our transaction dates. So these are the 6 years or the 6 files that we have in that column. And we have our states here for address state. And then we have all of our aggregated information. Okay, so when I'm ready with that, I will go ahead and add it to my recipe. Now for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and conclude here, just so we have some time for some questions. In order to generate an output, this is sort of the last step of the process. What we can do is click up here and select Generate Results. Then I can specify the formats that I want to run the job in, and whether or not I want to see some final profiling information. And whenever I'm ready, I'll generate results. So I can go ahead and do that, and that will then apply all of the recipes that we've created in that flow to our output, to create an output. So to show you what I mean, I can click on this summary here, and we'll get some final profiling information on our data, number of rows, number of columns, and so on. So I will wrap up there. Again, I want to leave some time for some questions. So if you have any lingering questions, please feel free to ask in the Q&A box of the webinar.